any sort of step 1, step 2, step 3 forms you need to go. So just drag and drop the page and put your fields and make sure you have set the navigation step to next. So that's about a multi-page form. Adding it to a web page is very straightforward, but it's little different than the other content pages. So basically what you need to do is, instead of a regular layout, you will take an MVC layout. So it goes into the views MVC layout.cshtml. So on this layout, you need to make sure these two lines are there. HTML.render form styles, HTML.render form scripts. So these two are really needed in order for the form to render out on a page. So make sure whenever you are starting up the form, you need to use the MVC layout and make sure your layout has these two lines on it. That's it. So these two are the two lines which we need to add, and then your form is ready to go. So let me show you how to create a simple form and how to add it to a web page. So here I am. This is my Sitecore 9.1 vanilla site. I don't have anything externally installed or any other styles or nothing. It's just a straightforward vanilla site. No external things are installed. So here I have some sample forms, but I'm going to create one new form, which I'm going to go with the blank form. I do have some templates, which I'm going to come back later. So I'm going to go a little faster. Please let me know if I need to slow down. So this is my new form. Already the page is already there. So I'm going to add a section. Section is nothing but a div. It just like wraps you out in one div format, and you can add any styles you need. So inside the section, I'm not going to add any styles because I'm a backend developer. I'm really a horrible person when it comes to front end. So I'm just going to add some single line text inside my section. Maybe this could be first name, last name, and an email. And just wanted to do one drop-down list. I wanted to show how to set up the data source, and I can put one submit button. So this is my, so as soon as you change out over here and click apply, it will change it over here. So it's an easy drag and drop, and I can put like what is the placeholder text I need, what is the min and maximum, the validation should be mandatory or optional, what is the class I need. This is that one class I remember from Bootstrap, so I'm just going to put on it and I'm just going to apply. So you can already see that the styles are applied, you can see the placeholder text is already there. The validation is I have set it to mandatory. The same you can do with all the fields as well. For the email, you don't need to write any regex. It's already, the email validator is already there. It's all baked in. All you need to do is just drag and drop and configure, and that's it. So I'm just going to apply. This is the drop-down list. So the drop-down list, either you can set up the list static, like you can add whatever you want to add from here. But this is not the typical use case we need when it comes to client points. So we always go for the dynamic. So the dynamic list can be come from anywhere in your content tree. So here I have on my Sitecore content tree, usually go into settings folder, but this is my trial site, so I don't have any settings. But you can just choose a node. Here I'm choosing home, but typically you will choose whatever your exact one, and what is the value field. Value field should be like ID or whatever you want to go, the text field. The text field I'm going to go with name. And you can choose like what is the default list item. So already you can choose, you can see the list is already there. So I wanted to show this one as a default, choose an item, and I don't want empty list or mandatory, and I'm gonna just do form control. I'm gonna apply, and you can already see my drop-down list is coming from a dynamic data source, and you can see the attendees conditional page and marketing sign up page. And this is my submit button. The submit button, if I have another page, like a thank you page, so let me add one more page. Yes, so I have another page. So here I'm going to add one single line text, say thank you, or just a text, not a field. Just going to delete, say thank you. So apply, and I'm going to do, on the summit, I'm going to bind some actions. So I'm going to bind a save data, and I can bind all those campaign activities, but for now, I'm just going to go with the simple one, save data. And I'm going to say that my navigation step is next instead of submit because I have a thank you page. So I'm going to save this form, something I'm going to say SUG Belarus. So I'm going to save this form. So go back. And now you can see that the form is already saved over here. And you can also verify it over here. After the content, you can see the forms folder. So here you can see the Belarus, and you can see two different pages. You can give an appropriate name to all these fields, but you can already see like all the fields are over there. And whatever you have set it up over here, everything you can see as well, like a dynamic one, and what is the defaults. So all the fields, whatever you have set it over here, everything you can see here. But the one thing is, Sitecore doesn't recommend changing anything from here. Like if you wanted to go for a static, you won't like come here and do any changes. So this is just for the viewing purpose, but if you wanted to do any changes, always go back to the form designer page and do any changes, save it. Once you save it, come back here and publish the form. So always for the form, once it's done, make sure you always publish it because the forms will be working only in the live mode, not in the preview mode. On the preview mode, still you can see the form, but when you submit it, it goes into some random form builder page, some stuff. So it's always recommended to use in a live mode. So that's why publishing is really important. I'm just going to create a page, SUG Belarus page. So how I'm going to add the form is, so here is my sample ones. So I'm just going to edit. The first step, I'm going to change it from a sample layout to my MVC layout. My MVC layout, here is my MVC layout here. So this already has these two lines. So I'm all set on this, so I'm just changed it to MVC layout, and I'm going to add a rendering. Rendering is again, it's a default one which comes with Sitecore. So you need to go inside the rendering system forms MVC form. Just going to add a placeholder, something called main. So I added it as main. All set, save. Going to publish. Oh, I need to, so it's in a workflow, so I just need to remove the workflow because otherwise it won't get published. I'm just removing the workflow. Republish is expensive, but I'm just, this is my small trial site, so I'm just doing it. So let me view this in a preview mode. It doesn't show any fields. Maybe I need to rebuild my index. looking into a preview mode to make sure that the page at least shows up, and then I can go into a save. I can go into the submit action. So what's wrong with this? So I have another pages which has the same one. I just wanted to see if I have done any. Oh, on the MVC form, I need to set up the data source. Sorry. So on the MVC form, that's how it knows like which form to pick up. So I'm just gonna pick up my SUG Belarus form. Just gonna publish. I'm gonna refresh. Yeah, here you go. The forms is already there. So don't worry about the styling. So let me go up into the live mode. So I'm just going to go into a incognito mode and put the URL over here, because it's always recommended to watch in. So here is the page. So I'm just going to fill out some stuff. So when I hit submit, so you can already see email is required. You can see the validation is already taking place. So I'm just going to say SUG belarus@gmail.com, and I'm going to choose something. So I'm just going to submit. So now it's redirecting to a thank you page. So the forms is done. Assume that this is a campaign which has sent to the customers, and some customers have already seen and submitted the page. So as a marketing or a content author, or from a marketing team person, they want to see how is the form is performing. Like, is it going really, sales is going good, or how is it performing? So as a marketing person, they don't need to come to a developer to get the data. So they can just come over here and go to the form, whatever they need, and export the data into a CSV. So I'm just gonna see. You can already see the forms is already over here. You can see the same information from your SQL experience forms DB as well. But from a marketing standpoint, I don't think they can write the SQL. They can just come here and export the data to a CSV and see how the form is performing. So this is how you create a form and add it to a web page. Just takes an hour, just takes few minutes. When you're doing it in a real time, it shouldn't take more than an hour with the styling and with everything. So how easy it is without any codes, without any writing any code, right? So let's get back on. So this is a pretty basic stuff. Still now, I haven't written any custom code. So let's move on to the custom one. So custom submit action. This is one of the most frequently asked client requirement, because on the submit action, either they wanted to call any Salesforce API call or any web API call. They wanted to send this information to Salesforce or any third-party DB or anywhere they needed. So creating a submit action is quite simple. It just comes with the 3 steps. The first one is go to this location and create your custom submit action. Once you have created the submit action, you need to create a code behind class which inherits from a submit action base, and you need to override the execute method. So inside the method, you read out all the form details. Like basically, you prep your model, call the web API, and return a boolean. So that's what this does. I have a demo. I'm going to show how to create a custom submit action right after this. So once you have the class file and everything is ready, you just need to come back to this one, and this has a field called model type. So here you just update your namespace and a class name file, and then put your error message in case if it goes on error. So the main important step is you just need to fill out the model type on which class it needs to refer. So very straightforward. three simple steps, your custom submit action is ready to go. The same for the custom validation as well. So in case if you need any regex validation to include Canadian zip code, or you can come up with any sort of requirement from the client. So if you need a custom validation, it's pretty straightforward. All you need to do is again go to this location, create a validation item. So there is a validation template already there. So you just need to create an item based out of the validation template and put your own regex and error message. That's it. It's very simple. So once you have created the validation, you bind it to any controls in the forms, any elements, wherever you need, you just drag and drop. You are ready to go. I'm going to show this in the demo as well for the custom ones. Custom control. So custom control is something like you want an image control or a video control, or any sort of requirements which comes in if you need a custom control. You just need to follow these 6 steps. This is not as straightforward as custom submit action or custom validation. You need some spec 3 knowledge to create a custom control, because you want those fields to be showing up on the forms elements. So that's why you need spec 2 or spec 3 knowledge. So the first 3 steps are straightforward and simple. The 4 and 5 requires the spec 3 knowledge. It's still doable, but it's going to take at least a day or 2 depending upon the requirement. But before you do a custom control, make sure you go to this form extensions, because this form extensions is available in the Sitecore marketplace, and it has quite a bunch of custom controls. It's already ready to go. So all you need to do is install your form extensions, and you can ready to use any of these controls. So the Google reCAPTCHA is one of the most frequently asked one. The rich text field or custom validators. So before you create any custom control, come over to a form extensions and see if whatever the control you need, if it is there. If there, you are lucky, you are ready to go. So let's go into what I can give you a little bit demo before we move on to Sitecore 9.1. Let me finish up like what's in Sitecore 9.1 as well. So till now we have seen what's in Sitecore 9.0. What's new in Sitecore 9.1 forms is conditional access. The conditional access is most frequently asked in Sitecore 9.0, because you need to write up quite a big code to write up a condition where you wanted to show or hide any of those fields based on the user input. So Sitecore 9.1 comes up with a big custom conditional access where you can just add a condition, and it has the show or hide. So it's again like easy to go, but there is a little trick on this which I'm going to show in a demo one. It looks like very straightforward, but it took me a couple of hours to figure out. I'm going to show this in demo, and you can save these forms inside the folders just for the arrangement purpose, and you can control the security access. So if you don't want your content authors to see what forms they can see, you can control it, and you can refill the forms. This is again from the value providers. It's doable, but still how do I say, it's not very straightforward, but it's good that they integrated this functionality. Let's go into a demo time. So I'm going to create one custom submit action and a validation. So here I am under content system settings forms. So as as you can see, there are submit actions, validations. So just gonna go with the submit action. I'm gonna create a new submit action. So I'm just gonna call it as SUG Belarus submit action. So I'm just gonna create submit action. So you can see as soon as I created, you can see this is the model type which you need to fill out once the class file is done. So so I'm going to go back to the code behind. Here is my custom submit action class already. I have saved it over here. I'm going to reuse it, but you can see that the custom submit action is inheriting from the submit action base, and it's overriding the execute action, which calls the execute method. So inside the execute, basically you write your coding. So how you write your coding is first you prep your model. So prepping your model, you need to read out all the field values from the form's submit context. So this one. So in order to get the field values, you need to use your reflection. So you can see that this one is getting it from the get value, and it's using the reflection to get the values. So whenever you need to read out any form values, make sure you use a reflection to get the fields. So this is for a straightforward for email address or for any text box ones. But for a drop down, this wasn't working. So I have to come up with another reflection to read out the drop down boxes. It's there in my blog. I'm going to share it at the end of the presentation. So once you have the model over here, basically here I have a requirement to call the sales force, but you can call any web API, call anything you need. And also you can save this information into a XConnect XDB contacts, and you can basically return the API calls results and your XConnect results. So return a boolean, and that's when it knows that the submit action is successful or failure. In case of failure, this error message will occur. If not, then it will show up the thank you page or whatever you have done on the submit button. So I'm going to take out this class and a namespace. I'm going to fill it out in a model type. So how I have done it over here, the same one. You just need to come over here, and so my class name is Sitecore Lean Custom Submit Action. So I just need to fill out, save, and you are ready to go. So now if I go back to the forms, I'm going to go here to the SUG Belarus, and for the submit action, I'm going to bind my new SUG Belarus submit action. So you can move this up first, and then you can move it down as per your requirements. Apply, save, publish, come back to the form. Your submit action is ready to fire. So this is all about the submit action. The same you can do it for the validation as well. So here is the validation. So I'm just going to create a new validation, insert from a template, but basically you will do from a validation template. So this is again, I'm just going to create the SUG Belarus validation, and I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm just going to go fast. So this is what type you need, the regex. So basically you can just copy and paste it, because everything is I think you need the regex one. So that was a string length validator. So but for a regular regex expression, so you just need to put down this class and a name file, whatever the message you need, and you will put your regex over here. Once you save it and go to your fields, so basically you can see like all the fields over here, and you can see the validation is already here. So you can add, you can rearrange how you need it. So I added this one to SUG Belarus. So if I go back to a single line text, so here I am in the single line text. So I think I needed a new one, I guess. So let me add a single line text. So you can see my validation is already there. So this will come in handy with any of your regex validation you need. You don't need to write any code. It's straightforward and baked in. You just can apply. That's it. Ready to go for there. What's new in set 9.1? I wanted to show the conditional access. So basically, have a form. So whenever you make any changes, make sure you save it. So I have a conditional access form. So basically what it shows is, let me go here. Let me show you the outcome. So here is my page. No, this is not the one I need. I need the other one. So here is my form. It's asking like how many attendees are there. So right now it's empty, but when I choose one, it's going to show attendee number one. When I go for two, it's going to show attendee number two. And you fill out your details and you hit submit. So basically on the user input, basically we are showing or hiding the fields. Let me show you over here. So here is my form. I have a drop down and I have a section of attendee 1 and 2. So on this drop down, I can create, on this drop down or a section, I can create the conditions. So here is the conditional section and I can add any condition. So I don't want to show this right now before I ask a question. So here I am in a section. Think about that it's on a drop down. So I'm just going to add a condition like saying, so basically when attendees is empty, equal to empty, I wanted to show the attendee section number 1. When it is empty, I wanted to hide both, right? I'm just assuming you are saying yes. So when it is empty, I wanted to hide. When it is 1, so this is how I write a C# condition. So when it is equal to 1, so I wanted to show or hide. So attendee section 1, I'm going to show. When it is equal to 2, when it is equal to 2, I'm going to show the attendee section 2. Is this loop correct? Right? When it is empty, you wanted to hide both. When it is 1, you just want to show 1. When it is 2, you wanted to show both. Sorry, you should have added one more. Right? This looks correct, right? This is the condition I have written before and it wasn't working at all. So it took me, so this is the one how I write it in C# and it didn't work at all. So what is the condition I have written over here is in order to work? This is the condition. Let me put it up in a bigger format. So this is the condition I have written saying when attendees is equal to 2, show both. When it is empty, hide only 1. But where is the condition for when it is 1? I mean, this condition doesn't look correct, right? I hope so. So basically how this works is, I'm going to show you another one. So basically how this works is, Sitecore forms conditions execute in a sequential basis. So basically when the condition evaluation is false, so it inverts the selected action. So when it is true, it applies it. When it is false, it basically reverses it. So that's when I have written it over here saying when it is empty, then this is false, then these both are going to hide. When it is 1, again you need to apply the same logic, but make sure whenever you are writing a conditional logic, make sure keep in your mind that when the condition is false, it's going to reverse the action. So that's the point I want to make whenever you are going for a conditional access. So what's new in Sitecore 9.2? Sitecore 9.2 is upcoming, so they are integrating JSS into forms. So if you are a front-end JSS developer, then forms is now integrated with, whenever Sitecore 9 is released, you can create a forms with JSS. So that's it. What happens to WFFM? WFFM is no longer here right now, but they do support the package for Sitecore 9. So in case if you are upgrading it to Sitecore 9, you have a support package so that you can still carry forward the WFFM. But for Sitecore 9.1, there is no support. You have to migrate from WFFM to forms. There is no choice. Same for Sitecore 9.2 as well. So if you have your in your website, if you have WFFM, it's time to migrate to Sitecore 9. Some of the common errors I want to talk about is here are the common errors I always see in a Sitecore Stack Exchange or in WFFM Forms Sitecore community channel, that you created a form and your form is missing. Whenever you see that if your form is missing, make sure you rebuild your master index. So whenever the form is created first time, there is a bug in the forms that it doesn't show up. But once you have done the rebuild, your rebuild index, then that's fine from going forward. But it just happens at the first time. So people go panic whenever they don't see the forms. So if you don't see the forms, make sure you are rebuilding your master index. The other one is redirecting to a forms builder on submit. So basically this happens when you don't have those two styles, those two lines on your layout.cshtml. So if you don't have it, make sure you add it. The last one is I received this error when on submit. So basically this said anti-forgery cookie on the request verification token is not present. So this happened whenever there is a caching is checked for any of the rendering or any of your page level rendering. Any of the caching is checked, and you will see this issue. So make sure the caching is off for any of your forms, or the container level also shouldn't be cached. And here are the good blog resources. The first one is the YouTube by Dylan Young. He has done a good 20-minute video on forms. So if you're new to forms and if you wanted to start up, this is a good resource. I even started out with this YouTube video, and I strongly recommend watching this video. And there are some bunch of good blog posts out here for a custom submit action or for a thank you page, or if you wanted to set a dynamic data source from an external one, there are a bunch of blogs which are really good. So, so these are the good ones. And the last, join the Sitecore Stack Exchange if you are not, and join the WFFM forms on the Sitecore community channel. So anytime if you experience any form related error, if you cannot resolve, post it over here. People are quite active over here, and they will touch base with you in person. So this is a great community channel to interact and post your questions. So thank you all for listening, and I'm ready to take on questions.
Any questions, guys? So, thanks, Matthew, for great presentations. I have one question. Is there any API built in to query the results of the forms the web data saved to database. So is there any API to query this data in order to, for example, to export into external system or something like that?
The built-in is the export to CSV file, but I haven't come up with any. I haven't seen any API to export to to external Salesforce cloud or any other thing. I think it's still a manual process, I believe.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I think that's it. Thanks. Yeah, and I hope we will see you around sometime soon.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you properly.
I said thank you for presentation, and I hope you will see you around sometime soon. Yeah,
Yeah,
in Belarus.
I'm sure. So whenever I visit Belarus, I'm
Oh,
gonna hit you guys first. So hoping sometime in future.
yeah. We do have one more question, probably.
Sure.
Thank you very much for presentation. It's very interesting, and I also like the slide regarding the Sitecore extensions. Can we get your presentation somewhere to download it, or can you please show us once more what extensions, Sitecore extensions, we should pay attention to?
Is this a question?
It's just some kind of request. It's not a question. Can we download your presentation, or where can we check it once again? Can you please share it, or that's
Yeah, the
that's the,
presentation, yes, I'm going to post this video I'm going to send this video to Daniel and he can post it in the page, in the Sitecore Belarus page.
all right.
Yep.
Thank you very much for presentation. It's very interesting
Thank
topic.
you all. Thank you all for listening. It was great presenting at SUG Belarus.
Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel, for the session. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye.
I know you regret it, love. You told me so many. I know you regret, but I still. I know you regret. I still. I know you regret it, love. You told me so many times, but I still. I know you regret. I still wonder.
You ain't gonna do shit. And don't we act like no pussy when we get the fuck out there.
That real shit. That real shit. That real shit. That real shit. That real shit.
gravity. That's how you
Yo, yo, yo.
I don't know, man. It could be anything. Yo, fuck this party, man. Fuck this party, man. We're just chilling.
That's how we do.
Hey.
Микрофончик ему нужно дать. Микрофон ему нужно дать, чтобы слышали те, кто на трансляции.
Oh, okay. Can you speak in microphone? So it will be louder on YouTube channel.
Okay, but is it required?
Hmm?
Is it required, or can I without?
А без микрофона будет плохо слышно, типа, или? Yeah, so it won't be any voice on the YouTube channel. Can we?
Yeah, I can try.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, hi. My name is David Zöcke, and I'm an application engineer at Unic in Switzerland. And this talk is about debugging techniques. Because no matter how well you develop, no matter how good your unit tests are, your QA is or any other automated test is, there is still the possibility that there is some data correlation that will break your environment, which happened a lot in our latest project. And I thought it might be interesting for you if I prepare 2 or 3 cases which we are going through, and maybe you can learn something from this. So I took those 3 cases and I recreated them in a local environment. So yeah, most of it is a little bit simplified, but the gist should be the same as it was then. So let's go to the first case, which was an IIS crash loop. Basically, what happened from one day to the other, our productive environment just stopped working, or at least the authoring environment. As soon as you opened the page, you just got the 503. And so we RDP'd to the server, and we checked what's wrong with the application pool, and of course it was disabled. So the first thing to do was to enable it, and in the hopes that it would just fix the problem, right? But a few minutes later, the application pool was again disabled. So that was pretty weird, and we checked the Windows logs, and we noticed that the IIS rapid fail protection kicked in, which is a feature, they call it, which will disable your IIS application pool after a certain amount of crashes, and that's what happened here. So the next thing we did was to check the Sitecore logs, and there was absolutely nothing. There was not even the standard Sitecore is shutting down message. It just cut off, and the next log file started. So that was even weirder. And then we also checked the Windows logs, and nothing visible was there. And what made things even more difficult was that we didn't have any code deployments in the past few weeks. So there was no commit message we could correlate to the issues we saw here. So the first thing we did was to generate a crash dump. And for that, we usually use adplus.exe. It's part of the debugging tools for Windows, which are provided by Microsoft. And yeah, you can basically just run it like that and append some params if you want to. What we attached here was the -pmn param, which is very useful because you can specify the process name that it should monitor, and even if the process is not started yet. So as soon as the process will start, it will just attach to it and generate a dump as soon as something happens, which we will see later. The next param -o is just the output directory, nothing fancy there. And the third one is -crash. Now you have, in AD Plus you have 2 modes. You got the crash mode and the hang mode. Basically, if there is an exception being generated or your whole process dies, you can use crash, because at that point in time it will take a snapshot of the memory. If you just want to take a snapshot of the moment at the moment you execute this command, you can use -hang, but we will see that in a later case. And the last param we are passing here is full on first, which I really recommend because default behavior by AD Plus is to only generate a mini dump if there is a first chance exception. A first chance exception is an exception that is caught by your user code. So if you have a try catch somewhere and you catch your exception, it counts as a first chance exception. If it bubbles up, it would count as a second chance exceptions because you didn't catch it. So the default behavior is that it will only generate a mini dump, which is not that useful because it only contains a list of all the threads and the current stack or the current stack trace of those threads. But if you really want to dig into the memory, into your object, into your heap, take a full dump. They are a little bit larger, they just mimic, they just take the whole memory, so be sure that you have enough space on your hard disk on your server. And this is what you end up with, or what we ended up with. The first 3 files are not so relevant for this case, but you can see at the bottom we got 2 full memory dumps. One was for the process shutdown event, and the second one we saw that there is some kind of stack overflow exception. So this might be already something that might hint toward yeah, something that could go wrong in your user code, right? So the next thing we did was to fire up Debug Diag, which is also a tool by Microsoft. Actually, it's a whole suite. It also contains graphical user interface for generating memory dumps, but yeah, we don't need that because we are coders, so we use the CLI. And another tool they provide is the Debug Diag Analysis, it's called, and it lets you run automated analysis on memory dumps. So we let that run, and this is how it looks. You have different modes you can select in what you are interested in. I recommend just to go with the first one. It's generating really good data usually. So, and at the bottom here, we just dropped in our memory dumps. And if you run it, that's the point in time where you go and grab a coffee, because this takes around 15 minutes or even more, depending on how large your memory dumps are. And what you will end up with is a report you can open in your favorite Explorer or Okay, so we can see some basic information about the process, and if we scroll down here, we have the list of the active threads. So we went through this and we saw that actually in thread 114 there was in fact a Stack Overflow exception. Okay, from here on you have multiple possibilities. One of them is using a tool I wrote. It's called Postmortem. It's open source. It's available on GitHub. It's also an analyzer for memory dumps, but it's a little bit simplified, but it's also a lot quicker. So if you compare the times here, maybe Debug Diag will take around 10 to 15 minutes, and Postmortem will give you an overview in around 15 to 20 seconds. I didn't pray to the demo gods today, it's visible. Okay, so you will get some basic information about memory regions, heap segments, heap balance, all the loaded assemblies. And if you search for the Stack Overflow exception we saw, we can see that this thread is on fire because it contains an exception. And now we can have a look at the stack trace here. And what we will notice is that something weird is going on in this frame. It seems to repeat over and over again, and this was exactly the same case in the real life or real world scenario. You can see it in the namespace here. Everything that is named Sitecore crash is from the custom solution. So, and we had some computed index field called referenced item computed field, and in there was a method called getRootID. So from here on we can start correlating the information and data we have collected until now from our analysis, right? So we went to the code and yeah, we found the method, and of course, maybe you can see the arrow, it's here. There was a recursive call. Now, we digged a little bit deeper and we figured out what the user requirements are or were at that point in time. Basically, Sitecore was importing items from other systems, and they told us there is this hierarchy of references. So basically an item can reference another item, and this one can again reference other items, but they promised that it would be in a tree structure. Meaning if you follow that chain, you would end up at an item that doesn't have any more references, right? So what they have actually sent was a graph and not the tree. So they had the circular references, and yeah, that's what happened during indexing. This thing just called itself until it ran into the Stack Overflow exception. So that's nice. We can fix it in the code. We fixed it, I think, by implementing some circuit breaker. We passed a list of all visited items, and if it was in the list, we would return early from the method. But this takes time, right? So somebody needs to implement it, we need to deploy it, we need to test it, and then we need to deploy it again to production or how many ever systems there are. So we still needed a way to figure out what item is breaking our productive environment and why can't we even start Sitecore. So then we went to the bigger cannons, one of them being WinDBG. I don't know, has any one of you ever used WinDBG? No? Okay.
I heard about this right now, as I know Microsoft implemented new feature for Visual Studio. Microsoft just grabbed from this tool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also from Microsoft. It was initially written for unmanaged application, but then they were so smart to implement also extensions called Son of Strike, which supports managed code like CLR stuff and yeah, stuff that we write in, right? And you can also load memory dumps, which is pretty cool. And the whole thing is more or less just a CLI, and syntax sometimes is a little bit esoteric. So let me open another page if that works. So I started creating this README when I first started working with WinDBG. It's available on GitHub. It just describes, again, how to generate a memory dump, and then a sequence of commands you can just enter or hammer in to initialize the SOS extensions and set your symbol path. And then I listed a few useful commands that can help you troubleshoot or analyze your .NET memory dumps. Okay, so we fired the tool up and loaded the second crash dump, which contained the Stack Overflow exception. And what is marked blue or greenish there in the top, that is user input, and things that are marked yellow are important addresses. So the first thing we entered was CLR stack, which will basically list you the current stack trace or the call stack of the thread you are in. And if you pass the -p param, it will also start listing the arguments that were passed. And yeah, we scrolled down to one of the frames which contained the getRoot ID call, and just took one of the items because we were sure, okay, this is creating this recursive loop, right? So from here on, you can do this dump object command, which will just list you everything about that instance. So you get all assembly information, you get properties, you get fields, everything. And as you know, our Sitecore API, every item has an item ID, and yeah, it's stored in this item ID field. So from there on, you can do the same command, just with the different address here. And as we know, an ID is nothing more than a class that holds a GUID in the end. So now instead of using dump object, you can use dt anti exclamation mark underline GUID with the address to get the ID printed out this nicely. Otherwise, if you would use dump object again on this instance, you would get the list or the field names of a GUID, which is like A, B, C, D, F, G, containing the bytes, and yeah, it's not really readable. So now we got an item ID. And what do we know about the Sitecore indexing or the Sitecore event queue? Basically, if you publish an item, at least in default configurations, the event that triggers the indexing will only be marked completed if the process really finishes. So if there is something that breaks your application pool or the process, the event that triggers the indexing will not be marked as done. So we just went to the web database, queried the instance data for that ID, And of course, there were some records, so we were pretty brave and just nuked everything from orbit. And we started the application pool again, and this time it was not crashing anymore because there was no event that should have been processed after Sitecore got up. Okay, so now we still had the problem that authors could work now, but as soon as they would trigger a full republish, it would run into the same issue again. So yeah, basically from here on, it was just a search for this item ID, and in this case, we are referencing an item called item 4, and this one was pointing back to item 3. So we just reset it to the default field values or emptied it, and from that point on, it worked. So the summary for that case, the data structure we expected was a tree, but we received a graph which contained recursions, which we of course didn't handle in the beginning, resulting in a Stack Overflow exception. And every time the application pool tried to start up, it wanted to index those changes, and it ran into the Stack Overflow exception. And after 5 times, the application pool was disabled. Okay. So the next case we are going to have a look at is a memory leak. I think it's interesting because we in the CLR or .NET world, we are not very used to memory leaks, I would say. It's more a problem for C++ people or people who write in unmanaged languages, right? But it's still possible to have memory leaks in .NET, as we will see shortly. So what happened here? Operations notified us that memory usage on author, productive author, was going berserk. And somehow they were able to relate that to a full index rebuild. So when you started the application, memory usage was okay, but then after you triggered a full rebuild, it was just spike up and stay. And the more you rebuild, the more leak we had. And apparently it was not a new problem, it got worse over time. And we correlated this to the amount of items we were importing, because as you have seen in the previous example, we were just eating data from third-party systems. We were creating thousands of records, and the more we had there, the more leak we had. So how did we go about this? Again, we generated 2 memory dumps, and this time, as you can see, in hang mode. So we started the application, generated a memory dump, and then let indexing run. And after it has finished, we generated another one. And you can see that instead of using -pmn, we are just using -p, where you can just define the process ID. So from this point on, we fired up .memory. I don't know who has used .memory before. Okay, cool. So right? Okay, so it also has a feature for comparing snapshots and memory dumps, which is really, really handy. Especially now, in this case, you can see we got a delta in the byte array type of around 2 gigabytes, which in this example is the memory leak we had. So after rebuilding, we had around 2 gigabytes of more memory consumption. And another interesting thing you can see here at the bottom is that in the first snapshot there was no instance of the sample service, but in the second one we had we have 42 alive instances of this sample service thing. So, and it looked exactly the same on the real world case. So that's stuff you should just write down. If you notice something like this, write it down. It might be useful further down the road during your analysis. The next thing we did was to, again, in .memory, just open the second memory snapshot. And the first thing you will see are those 2 pie charts from .memory. Basically, we saw that, byte array was the biggest type in memory, consuming 2 gigabytes. And then something new was this service provider type, which retained 2 gigabytes, meaning if you release this type or free it, it will free 2 gigabytes by freeing every related instance to it, because it is holding the last references to the items and therefore preventing garbage collection of those instances. So that's a new class, and it was not in our custom solution, and it was not from Sitecore. It's actually a type from the Microsoft Dependency Injection Framework. So we switch to this similar retention tab, which will show you instances and types which are freed at around the same time, and it also gives you these nice graphs which show references between objects. So what we can see here is if we select the byte array, we will again see the sample service from the first screenshot from the comparison. Apparently it's somehow holding those bytes. And then we can also see the service provider class from the screenshot before. So somehow those things were correlating, right? So if you double click instance in dot memory, it will show you like all the fields, the values it has, and outgoing references. And you can see that this service provider is retaining, again, 2 gigabytes. And interestingly enough, there is a field called underline transient disposables, which is a list of iDisposables, and again, retaining around 2 gigabytes. And when we open this field, we will see around 48,000 or more instances of sample service. So apparently those are the references which are keeping the sample service instances alive. So basically we didn't know what to do from that point, so we just went to the code and checked how the service was registered, because we know transient is a keyword from the dependency injection. Maybe it's related to this, and we know that disposable is also something we should know. And indeed we saw that the instance was registered as transient. And then we opened the implementation and we saw that it's actually also implementing iDisposable, and in this case it's just initializing an array in the constructor and holding 50 kilobytes. So it turned out that this service was resolved every time in a computed field, and like multiple times for an item. And this also explained the correlation between amount of items imported and the amount of leak we had. So we did some further research based on the information we have gathered until now, and pretty quickly we found an issue in the official dependency injection GitHub repo describing this problem, that even saying this will lead to memory leaks, you have to fix it, right? Because I think Microsoft, or the guys who implemented it, assumed that if you would resolve the dependency, you would be the one who would call dispose, which in my eyes doesn't make much sense in a DI context, but whatever. So we wrote Sitecore support asking them if we could maybe upgrade to version 1.1 of the DI framework, because they fixed it in version 1.1. The version Sitecore 9.1 ships with is 1.0. And that was their response. It's basically, nah, don't do it. It will break everything and unexpected behavior. Rather just upgrade to Sitecore 9.1. And yeah, we didn't do that yet. We are pushing the client to upgrade to 9.2. But what we did in the meantime was to just register the dependency as scoped. It's working for our case, but yeah, it's a quirky workaround. But at least we found the root cause. So, and the final and third case is RabbitMQ processing, which was stuck on our side. What you need to know is that the solution we were working on had a lot of third-party systems where we were pulling data from. In a separate solution, we called it middleware, and they would process the data and push everything into a RabbitMQ queue. And then we had a job in Sitecore which would just pull those queues and create new items, update existing items, delete items, and stuff like that. And apparently this one just got stuck from one day to the other. The customer noticed that they were expecting data, but they couldn't find it in Sitecore. So the first thing we did was to run to the middleware guys and ask them what was wrong, and they were like, nothing, the logs look fine. So we checked the queues in RabbitMQ, and yes, the queues were filled up and nothing was worked down. So it was just filling messages, and it seems like nobody cared. So we checked the Sitecore logs, and again, nothing visible there. So what did we do? We generated 2 memory dumps, and yeah, just some minutes apart. This is a really handy technique if you want to just compare maybe the threads. Let's see which threads were active 10 minutes ago and which threads are active right now, because this can usually indicate something that is stuck, right? Because it's maybe in a thread sleep or it's in an endless loop, something like that. So we fired up debug diag again, and it pretty quickly told us in a warning that there is some HTTP web request, we are waiting for it, and this is not so good because it might block other threads and it could even lead to deadlocks. So that sounded weird. It's not something that you usually see when you're running debug diag on a vanilla instance. And from here, we just scrolled down to the thread information of the thread that was mentioned there. And what we saw is apparently there was this URL being called, which was a call to Solr. So that looked interesting. And we went to the productive environment and enabled search logging. We had to disable it in the beginning because we were just floating data, and I think the license of the logging server ran out, so we enabled it temporarily. And that's what we saw. It was like totally bananas, because we had multiple search log files just filled with this. And based on the query or the naming there, we quickly found out that yes, it's indeed an item that was being imported. It was run from the RabbitMQ queue. And the second thing we noticed was this very weird incrementing number. And we couldn't find and correlate this to any real-world item. Right now here it's at 248,000. It was way higher in the real-world case. So yeah, we went back to the debug diag report and had a look at the stack trace again, and yeah, we saw again our custom solution namespace in there, and at the top you can also see that it was indeed doing something with Solr. So the case was pretty clear where to look. So we went to the code, and that's what we have found. Basically, the first thing you can see is this while true loop. It's always a red flag, but don't dismiss it right now, or not yet. So the next thing you can see is yes, there was indeed a lookup to Solr. And the third weird thing was this one. So somehow it's taking the title and it's replacing spaces with dashes. So we went through the commit messages and we pretty quickly found the user requirement there. Basically the requirement was to, if an item was being imported and the title already existed, make sure that it has a unique title. So how it was implemented here was that it would do a Solr query checking, is there an item with that title? If yes, just append a suffix, which was this counter thingy here. And it would again do a Solr query, and if there was a result, it would increment it and then do the whole thing over and over and over again until there was no result being returned, because then apparently you can assume that it's unique. So we took one of the queries from the search log because in our eyes there should have not been an item with that name, with 248,724 as a suffix. We knew that was not possible. And yeah, it was confirmed that apparently something was being returned here. So but we also noticed this one, and this does not make sense, right? Looking at the code before, there was this call to replace white spaces with dashes. So this doesn't make sense. And that's the moment when you start Googling those weird queries like text to ASCII or something. And what I did here, I just pasted on the top row, I pasted the data from the query, and at the bottom I typed it down. So that's the character. That's the white space from the top, and that's a real white space. And this one is actually a horizontal tab, meaning it does not do an exact match because Solr is interpreting the horizontal tab as a white space and therefore doing a text match and not an exact match. So, yeah. The problem here was we didn't sanitize the data that we got. And therefore, the method got stuck in this endless loop. And yeah, how we fixed it, we implemented sanitization in the middleware and on Sitecore, and in the end, we even recoded the whole unique lookup logic, so it doesn't have this endless loop there with the while true. So let's just quickly recap on how you could extend your toolkit. The first tool I recommend is .memory. It's a memory profiler. You can visualize memory usage. You can even run automated analysis there. There are points where it will just straight up tell you there is your memory leak. You have a subscribed event handler you are not unsubscribing from. As you have seen, it can show you retentions and dependencies, and it also supports snapshot comparison. And if you want to learn more about it, there's a really great playlist by JetBrains on YouTube containing around 10 to 15 videos, each taking around 3 to 5 minutes. And it's really worthwhile watching them because you get a way better understanding from the tool, or of the tool. The next one we didn't have a look at today is a .trace. It's also from JetBrains. It's a performance profiler. You can use it to analyze logs and hangs, and you can also use it, of course, for performance analysis. If you have some rendering that is very slow, just fire up .trace. It will pretty straight up tell you this is slow, fix it. And even there you can compare snapshots, and you even have the possibility to configure the data collection mode. So based on your requirements, you can either have just a high-level overview, or you can really have a very deep sampling rate, which, yeah, it reduces the performance while measuring, but you get way more insight into your solution and the problems you might have there. And also there, JetBrains has this great playlist. I really recommend to check it out. Then WinDBG, yeah, you can just analyze everything. And the cool thing is it's scriptable, and there are APIs officially provided from Microsoft. The postmortem tool I showed before is based on an API called CLRMD, really easy to use. It has a pretty steep learning curve. You might have seen it on the last command we have fired. It has some weird commands, but the more you start using it, the more rewarding it gets, especially because you learn a lot about CLR internals. And as the name implies, it's also a debugger. So instead of attaching Visual Studio, you can attach this thing, and you have way more flexibility and power. And it has also recently been reworked by Microsoft. It's now called WinDBG Preview, and you can download it for free from the Microsoft Store. And if you are interested there, maybe in a Kickstart or something, I really recommend this post by Doug Rathbone called Investigating ASP.NET Memory Dumps for Idiots, in parentheses like me. Yeah, it's a very good instruction and tutorial even. And then the last one I can strongly recommend, as you have seen, is debug diag analysis. Also automated analysis of your memory dumps. It's also extendable. You might remember the modes we selected at the beginning. You can just write your own analysis there as well. And yeah, it's great for comparing hang dumps especially. You don't get a lot of information if you have a crash dump, but if you're comparing hang dumps, you get really cool output, as you have seen before. It will even tell you this is your URL that is being called that might cause deadlocks. And if you want to read up there, you can just open the tool and hit F1, which will open that nice help screen. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. Are there any questions?
Last question. So, for example, this is a good tool if we just are talking about Sitecore, just installed in VM or just we have our own server. What about nowadays? We know that Sitecore supports platform as a service on Azure when we just have a TP, and so just probably we can attach. And have you been experienced with that?
No, I don't have any experience there, but I would assume if you have an APM or something like a monitoring tool, they usually also provide ways to generate snapshots. And I would assume that if you have some cloud service that is serious about what it does, it should be possible to generate those memory dumps. I would hope.
And one more question from my side. Probably it will take some more time just to use this tool, just to understand. Maybe it will be better just to log as much as we can. For example, just to use, our source code, yeah. So for example, just use post sharp login when we do not need to just log every line of code, yeah, every layer. For example, we just can carry some attributes and log everything. Yeah, it's reflection, but probably it will be better. What do you think that?
Do you think it would be better? I mean, it will firstly hurt performance, I would think. And you are obfuscating, let's say, your code with stuff that doesn't really belong there, right? Because you are not writing code to analyze it, but you're writing code for user requirements, I would say. But I think it would be a valuable approach. And for me, why I went this route was the project was already running for almost 2 years, I think, and then I just got assigned to it, and we had this really huge code base, so it was really difficult to even understand what the requirements were and where is what code. So for me, approaching it that way with tools I already knew made it for me much faster, I would say.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And how much time do you need, or did you need to uncover these mysteries, this one?
Yeah, in the beginning, pretty long, because I didn't know any of those tools. And I just read this blog post like, okay, you are effed and you need to use WinDBG. And I was like, okay, what else should I do, right? And then, then I invested a few days. It was like 3 or 4 days just to understand what was even going on in the CLI and what it was trying to tell me. And it didn't load SOS extensions properly, and it didn't load my symbols. It didn't recognize the symbol path. So that's why I say it has a pretty steep learning curve. But if you're at the point where you can a little bit use it, it can work wonders, really.
Do you mean production was down for 4 days?
Yes. Yes, it was down for 4 days. Any other questions? What? Not yet. Yeah, they weren't even shifting content. And I could imagine if that happened during content shifting or later. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much.
Yo.